here in the studio. We've kicked off this thing. We've got everything. If I can check around, everything is actually in the red and it's rolling. So welcome to the studio. What's on your mind today, my friend?
Well, we had talked a lot about the whole idea that the new digital world has all this promise. It's the new industrial revolution. And then there are all these other concepts. You referred to some earlier today where we talked about the whole idea that, well, artificial intelligence is coming. It's going to be to the level to where it takes away every human job. Humans will be left without jobs. And I think there's a book by Harari that makes that point, that ultimately there'll be an elite that runs technology, and that everyone else will just be sitting there and living off the government dole. That's sort of some of the conventional wisdom that's out there. So ultimately, is it true? And I'm asking your thoughts on this because you're the big technology guy and do all the.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So is it in fact true that that technology has achieved all this promise and has radically altered our life in a way that's increased our productivity?
Well, now you just sent me a loaded question over here, and I saw all of the different things that you just threw into that question to make it more complicated. Because is technology moving, changing our environment? Yes. Are robots taking our jobs? Yes. As a matter of fact, if you go in the manufacturing warehouses these days, you don't see immigrants working. You see robots working.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody had called them immigrant robots.
Mm-hmm.
They've come in with the sort of political climate there. They've come in, and that's where do the people go? So that's a serious problem. So in a way, the technology is actually canceling out some of our gains. The progress in moving toward that is going to make life better. Yeah, it is going to make life better. It has already. It's made it more complicated. I'm no expert at this. I can only tell you from personal experience and things I've come across. But the technology can be a double-edged sword. It can be a friend or foe.
Yeah.
And I think the promises is part of the problem. Now, so this is a part of your question. We're going to rewind that question and look at it later maybe, but it was like I said, it was a loaded question, but there's a piece of it that these are promises. Hey, your life's going to be easier.
That's right.
Well, wait a second. What? And be specific about that. You're going to have a flying car. Remember that one.
Right.
I think we're going to talk more about that whole idea.
Yeah.
Title of an article, which I think you've said, and I think I've said at some point, where's my flying car? Because I was promised that when this technology thing took off.
Yeah, or just the driverless car, which right now is fraught with all kinds of difficulties. And the big proponents of this have had to walk back their projections because these driverless cars keep doing things, and this driverless technology keeps ultimately killing people, even though probably they're a lot safer than human beings driving the cars. You know, the idea, I guess, is that, well, you know, if I get in a driverless car and then it wrecks, I don't have any control. So folks have that in the back of their mind, the whole "I don't control it" concept.
Right. Yeah, and it will be a real process of change, and I think you're right. Some of these people have Elon Musk comes to mind that have put these real short-term goals where everybody's going to be in a car like that or something. And I think they do that on purpose. I think there's some kind of strategy behind the crazy talk in a way. I do believe that, and that's something we can talk about more too on many subjects. But the proponents push it out beyond what is the manufacturing and technology is capable of to kind of get the word out, and then they will move the goalpost back a little bit, and they'll meet it in the future. There seems to be a strategy.
At what point is it overpromising, and where is that line between that and a good marketing hyperbole? Because we all say our product's the best product. That
it's an interesting question, I think, and whether or not that people will project this out in a marketing strategy and put a deadline out there that's way too soon for this to develop and us to get the information. However, in the idea of driverless cars you're talking about, they have so much data now that's coming back to them to make some decisions with. And I think in a way that's how technology works. It provides analytics. It provides data that you can then begin to measure and make changes in the product and make things better.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think is good. But back to your loaded question, yes, almost everything new comes out of the chute. You got the early adopters, you've got hype, you've got trends, you've got people kind of reacting in different ways, good and bad. And then eventually, as progress moves along, things settle out. We get more accurate picture of what's happened. So, unfortunately, Tom, you do not have a flying car that comes out of a suitcase like on the Jetsons. So I'm sorry about that.
My worry is that the whole idea that really what the business is in the United States is a software business. The majority of venture capitalism goes to 3 or 4 cities, and it goes all into software. Ultimately, what is being produced in the United States, because all the manufacturing's done overseas. Now, that may change as these other countries become more affluent, and then we may end up with manufacturing back here. But
I'm not sure all, but a lot. Yes, definitely.
Well, look at Columbus. I mean, what fed Columbus for years is gone, and essentially the jobs here are all in information. And as a college official, I always touted that. But in the back of my mind, I always worry if there's not a finished product that we can take to market and sell. It's kind of hard to sell concepts, and it doesn't create jobs for everyone. In other words, those folks who are in the information software business are going to have game in that area. So what happens to the rest of folks? That's a Harari idea that, well, they won't have anything to do. There won't be anything for them to do.
Yeah, there's almost a digital divide, if you will. Lots of divides we're having to do with people have and have nots, kind of those kind of things. You're right about the big cities having that technology and sort of centered there. I think not long ago there was some, just a few months ago, I think it was Amazon who was trying to locate their new headquarters and they didn't choose a smaller rural type setting, which they could have.
Right.
And they went to the big mega metropolises that we have around. And so as long as that continues, it's going to be, perilous kind of journey, because we're going to have that divide. And if some folks don't have an opportunity, then we're going to have a real problem. It should be that everybody has an opportunity, but hey, that's another concept too. Make your own way. This is America. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Everybody's can be president or whatever. Those kind of things still are in people's minds. So it may be a boomer idea, but on the other hand, how should technology go? Should people have access? Should people have the opportunity to build? So you've got that going on with what you also just said, which was the idea of being centered in one location, and then another person who's not in that location doesn't have the opportunities in that. Where does it go from there? That's kind of the question. How do we, let me just say this. Part of the issue has been that technology came on. Jeff Conklin talks about this. It came on before we were ready.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know what to do with it. Here's this shiny new toy that's going to make everything wonderful, but we hadn't processed what it's like. How would it affect our lives? What do we really want out of technology? So these things move fast in that way. We're all of a sudden having to catch up, and there's a book coming out. I forget the author's name. Sorry, but the title is "The Future Is Faster Than You Think."
Right.
At this end of this month.
Yeah.
And this guy the author describes just how we're not ready and what we need to do about that. I think that's going to be a big question.
Well, it's sort of hard to predict how things are going to. So we're operating in a vacuum in a sense that we don't have the data to really understand what the consequences of all these things that are happening now. And I think that's true throughout history. You know, if Kurt Vonnegut was going to write this whole scenario, he would go back and say, well, if technology takes all the jobs, then in his story, I would think there would be something like a grassroots revolution, and the government would have to tell technology to take a hike, and we're going to go back to manufacturing and manipulate all that, you know.
Right, I think. And, you know, the idea, too, and somebody said this just the other day, and it just kind of hit me like a brick, but 2/3 of Americans have a high school education.
Right.
Only a third have beyond high school. That doesn't prepare you to work on at these levels that require so much math and the kind of computer skills and all of the service skills that we have in this industry now and have in the world, in our society, certainly, and others. You're not prepared for them, so you have to do that. You've talked about education a lot and trying to get out, and you did some work in what is at CSU to try to reach out to those who typically don't have an opportunity to come to college and all that. That was a big issue and an important one. It just seems like all these boats have to rise at the same time, and I don't know.
Well, here's the other thing. What are we teaching in college? So if ultimately everything's going to go the technological direction, shouldn't university higher ed be basically about coding and computer science and technological? You know, certainly have the math and science and that kind of thing, but
right. Well,
all these other things we teach in college, should we just sort of forget about that? Because really, ultimately, it doesn't prepare you either. And the same thing's true in public schools. We have this huge canon of things we teach because we have this American ethos where you're building the better citizen, the voter, and everything. But now, are we in a new age, or their new set of skills? For a while, the buzzword, everybody was studying critical thinking and soft skills. That was going to be the new thing.
Right.
But now I think we're off that too. So I'm not sure where we're headed with that.
It really is hard to know, but it just keeps moving.
Yeah.
And if this the technology sector moves faster than everything else, all the other sectors, then we haven't figured this out yet. But I want to reframe it in some ways because I want to see this in a positive way. That's kind of my take on it. Most things, but this is an exciting challenge. So what are you going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
You can frame it in different ways, but listen, we enjoy our phones and we're all, connected to the grid and we're doing these things and we feel like we're smarter now, maybe, or we have more access to information. This dissemination of this conversation, for example, we're doing a lot of things now that we've never been able to do before. So I want to say this might be the opportunity, if we can manage this right and not shoot ourselves in the foot, and make something out of this revolution. And yes, it's going to be gains and backpedaling and moving forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and all those kind of things. But I want to see this in a positive way. I'm that kind of guy that we can work through problems, and we're in a country that work through a lot of problems. So why not this? And how do we make it better?
Do you see it as an issue that the ubiquity of some of these technologies has, in a way, made us disconnected from each other?
Yeah, I think. Yes, we've had a similar conversation around that question. We need more work with it to try to answer and get a good answer with it, because I think there are always losses with these gains. It's never a total. On the positive side, on the black side instead of the red, if you're looking at the accounting. But the notion is that we do have to manufacture things. We have to make things.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to do the plumbing and the electrical and the building and
Right.
we making things, right?
Yeah.
So we have to have that in our world. We have to have a balance with this service industry where everything's on a screen in front of us and you need to know software and programming and coding and things like that. Well, that's just another piece of the puzzle. It's not everything, and it shouldn't be. We've got to adopt some basic skills that we talked about in here a lot, and that is accommodation, empathy, being who you are, being authentic, appreciating other people and all that. Those counseling things you hear me talk about occasionally, but that needs to be involved in this whole process, so that we look at what our values are and those things that are of value to us, and we can go ahead and project out to a point, at least to a certain extent, of where we want to be. We got some vital questions to answer before we get to that. But I think we need to pose that question. Where do we want to go with all this? Where do we want to end up? It's kind of like retirement. That's something you and I both can talk about.
Yeah.
But what you want retirement to be? Well, retirement is ongoing.
I don't think we've ever really intentionally asked those questions. As you say, the future is whatever the title of the book is. The future is here now.
Yeah, the future's
it's
faster than you
think, or whatever.
I don't know about that.
So here's the present. It's Thanksgiving. All the family comes over. There are the grandchildren. There's mom and dad around the table. There's the grandparents around the table. The grandchildren all have their phones or pads out.
Right.
And they're watching videos.
Right.
The parents are checking their email and checking to see if we're going to put the next picture from Thanksgiving up on Facebook. And then there's grandpa and grandma, and they're checking their Instagram accounts or Twitter
all right.
accounts.
Some pretty progressive grandpas. Well, I think that's true. That's
so what's happened to Thanksgiving? What's happened to family time and that kind of thing? And
you feel like, hey, I'm going to text you past the cranberry sauce.
Well, it goes to the point of what we talked about 20 years ago when people would be in the next office and email you rather than talk through the door. That was one of our friends used to say, just come in and tell me. Don't email
That's
me.
Right.
But the other thing is this. So, all the data that we have collected about instruction and education shows that the efficacy of digital instruction, online instruction, which is where it was all headed about the time I retired.
Right.
It was hard to teach in person. You couldn't find a class to teach them. Nobody wanted to take an in-person class. So all the data was showing, hey, it's as effective or more effective. But I'm always suspicious of the whole data thing. As a educator from public schools, I always wanted to ask, well, what data are we collecting? And is it really telling us what we need to know to make for a better life?
And how is it interpreted? That's a big point of it. So there's data, but then what do you do with it? What do you make of that, and how you apply it in the situation?
Well, and the ironic thing was I was an early adopter of online instruction. I was one of the very early ones at Columbus State. And
I actually have a video of you years ago on a green screen in the old studio where you were talking about that. And I saw that not long ago. So we have some archives here that can track back. And when you say I did that, hey, I've got evidence you did that, by the way. So cool.
So I was an early adopter. I thought this stuff was cool. It was fun to work with. I loved building websites and all that stuff. But as I did that, I always saw that as a side of what my real job was, which was to create new streams of knowledge as a researcher, and to go into the classroom and connect with students and do that and help people be better leaders. And now I wonder, are we going to look back and say, we really dropped the ball, but all the data we were collecting told us this was all good, but maybe we didn't collect the right data, because now we have all these unanticipated consequences. People disconnected, two poles look at things politically. Now that you have everything out there on the internet, people look at the news and they go to the sites that reinforces what they already think.
Oh,
and
that's
there's
right.
no listening to anybody else. So
see the show on confirmation bias. Just a plug there. There you go.
Well, I was watching the whole latest impeachment news and all that, and depending on which channel you watch,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi is either a great American hero or the worst,
or the worst person ever.
Yeah.
I mean, how does this work? And there's that now underlying that I think is a real problem too. And I don't mean to kind of you'd go to that point as you need, but it made me think that we've got these corporations, like you said, they're in these big cities. That's where the tech giants are, Silicon Valley, New York, all those places, that are making themselves wealthy.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
That's what we're doing. We're in this.
Which is the American way, right?
That is the American way, and we're going to get rich. And Jeff Bezos, we have that picture somewhere around the studio where he's sitting at a small desk and a big CRT monitor with a paper banner up that says Amazon.com.
Right.
Well, now, so that's a problem when we don't understand some of the humanity that should underlie this, because otherwise it comes across as greed, and I'm a little concerned about that being sort of our goal in the end, because that's not a really good goal from my point of view, and we talk about that. But the idea that you can come along and be prosperous and make something of yourself and make a contribution to the world and even have a lot of money, that's fine. Wait a minute, it's going up now. It's just exploding to the point that it's impossible for people to get ahead, and it's really, really easy for others to get ahead. And there's something wrong with that system. I'm not sure how to articulate that very well.
And really understand, I'm not down on technology. I'm just wondering if we're utilizing technology to meet the needs of humanity that exist right now. And to that point, here's the things I constantly sort of think about as existential threats. One is the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, which is a technological issue. How do we come to terms with that? But the other one, even more and seemingly even more pressing, is the whole idea of global climate change. And could we, as a global society, take a look at how do we utilize science and technology to replace the present technologies that essentially global climate change is being caused by, the whole idea of creating energy, and you need more and more energy, and you have more and more people, and that's been good to us. But now, how do we transform those things into new kinds of energy producing entities that don't impact the climate so drastically?
Right.
And those could create jobs too. So I think that may be potentially a goal for us. I wish that governments would promote those kinds of things instead of argue about whether it's happening,
Right. It almost seems like some of this is being talked about on the sidelines, but for me, that's the key point. The thing you just said is that we need to make that direction change with technology that can capture carbon out of the atmosphere, and make that we talked about solar energy and solar powered. I mean, Peggy, my wife wants our house to be solar run. She wants those panels up and all those kinds. She's talked about it for a long time. So is other people. So I think really that there's an opportunity, and it may just be a generational issue, that maybe our generation, as we come along, we did a lot of good things, but we need to hand this off to people and the new technologies. And and I'm taking a developmental look here, and maybe a hopeful one too, but the idea that this new innovation, this new approach, not just to getting a chip that's faster and compute faster, but that actually is aimed at something that we really need to address. And if that happens, we may not see it, but it's going to be a good thing, maybe.
Do you know, maybe it's a new perspective for me too, because for so many years I was tied up with doing administrative work and earning a living and raising kids and that kind of thing.
What you have to do, right?
And I didn't really, in a lot of ways, see the big picture. I saw a picture as it related to the entities where I was working.
Right.
And tried to address the issues that I saw coming down the pike, and I tried to be futures oriented too.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me that the whole that since I've retired, I see the world in an entirely different way. I see it more in the sense of, well, what will be happening in 50 years? Now I won't be here.
Right.
So I'm not sure why that's happened, but I've become this sort of neo-progressive that says, hey, we don't have our eye on the ball that's coming at us down the plate. Now, it may be that the future is coming faster than we think, but maybe the future's not what we think. In other words, we may be distracted by all the play pretties and coolie deals, and we may be missing the fact that Venice is underwater. I mean, Venice is currently underwater, and it's almost like we go, well, yeah, that's terrible for them, but what happens when it's Miami? Which, incidentally,
by the way, some of the streets are flooding there.
They are flooding in Miami, and my thought is ultimately on that deal. I wrote an article years ago, and it was about technology. It was about what a Wechselblatt disaster is.
Okay.
The idea is that you develop a technology, and the very technology you develop makes the problem you have worse.
Oh.
The example I used, there were a lot of examples, but the example I used was Katrina. The very technologies that were supposed to keep the water out kept the water in, right? So it created a Wechselblatt disaster. Well, now, my worry is, certainly over the next 20, 30 years, we can keep water out of New Orleans, but what happens when the ocean continues to rise? Right. And that kind of thing, and whether it is that coal burning industries or cars or whatever are creating this or not, the point is it's happening. So what are we going to do about it? And that discussion, rather than needs to be more goals oriented, I guess. That's the neo-progressive in me.
No, I like it, and I like what you said too, because it fits with. When I was in graduate school, I had to take a course, and I didn't know much about it, but it was called adult development.
Yeah.
And this was psychology courses and counseling, that kind of thing. But the idea was, hey, first of all, there is adult development. You just don't get to age 21 and then you stop and you got the rest of your life.
So we're not washed up.
No, we're not. Saying. We're not. Definitely not. And the idea too, I think, is that we're constantly. And they're talking about stages, and I wanted to mention this. This is something you said, that when you retired, now you can begin to see. Well, it's almost in a way unfortunate that we have to wait till after the job cycle and we're in retirement to look at the whole of the picture that we are involved in. And I'm hoping with this, again, but the intellectual and the digital revolution that we're in is going to inform people earlier in that development so that they make better choices, both individually and both as companies and corporations, to be able to address some of these things and see what's important. Money is one thing. We all want to make money, but hey, there's some things that are more important than that, sorry to say.
Well, certainly that promise is there. This whole idea of looking for the ball coming out of the pitcher's hand. This whole kind of metaphor I was working around. I think if I had the last 20 years to do over again.
Right. Oh boy, that's a big one right there.
I would spend a good bit more time, especially in a leadership role, leading people to have the discussion, what should we be doing, rather than the discussion being about, well, what is University of Georgia doing? What is
this mandate that we've been handed down to fulfill, and without any really a discussion about it at all.
Yeah, because really, ultimately, all these things are happening around us, but we almost are looking to the past to drive what we're doing. We want to be today's, let's say in education, we want to be today's Harvard or the Southern Harvard. Well, the ultimate question is, what's coming down the pike? What's coming out of the pitcher's hand? What should I swing at? What shouldn't I swing at?
Right.
And
good
I don't
baseball
think,
analogy there.
I don't think as a leader I did that enough. I think what I did more was say, what problems are we having now? Okay, we pulled the people together. We threw things on the table. We got a lot of feedback, but it was almost like we were addressing what's right there in front of us and not looking to the future, whereas ultimately the role of leadership should be to be a little more futures oriented. So
I kind of think that we find ourselves where we're working in a corporation or university, as we did in other kinds of organizations, that you sort of encapsulated in that environment. You're breathing the air.
Point.
You're seeing it from that perspective, and you're sort of have some blinders on to what's going out there, because you got to take care of your own, and so to speak. You've got a job to do. Your boss is asking you to do these tasks. You're doing that task. You're not saying, hey, does this fit into my philosophy of what we should be doing in this environment? No, you don't have that luxury. You're in that corral, and that's what you have to work with. So the big questions at that point don't seem to be very important to the people around you or the organization that you're in.
Well, and
it's interesting.
You're in a routine. So this is year 5 of your credit.
And it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Routines are comfortable.
Well, and you're in year 5, let's say, and it's of your accreditation. Well, you got to start working on that report. Then you also know you have a budget.
Don't remind me.
And you're going to send in the budget that you essentially sent in last year, tweaked for whether you have more or less money coming down the pike projected. Right. Yeah. So you know you're going to do that. You know you're going to have your regular monthly meetings, and you need to prepare for that so you don't look silly or unprepared. And you're doing all that.
Right.
But it's not doing what you want to be doing, which is saying, okay, gang, here's the future, and it's coming faster than you think. Let's talk about what it might look like and come up with some alternatives that we might try to see if this takes us in the right direction. And that's really, I think, I'm working with Bridget Markwood, who I worked with on some projects at Columbus State University. We're talking a lot about what does education need to be down the road. And a lot of what we've come up with is what we're doing is really what we've been doing. And we've been doing it for years and years and years. And we don't even have defined what we think education should be doing. So we just keep doing what
you're on that treadmill and you're starting to run, and that's what you do, and that's what you know, and so you get back on that treadmill, keep rolling with what you've done before, and you're going to do that tomorrow. That's a challenge. But I have to say, one thing I like about what you've done in the past that was significant for me as a faculty member when you were department chair, and you had us read books and come into a faculty meeting instead of going over various technologies or something we had to do for the chancellor or something, but that we had to think, we had to read, think, and then discuss things. And I always thought that was great when you
went over like a lead balloon with some folks.
Well, I tell you what, they didn't. They should have rethought that, because
it was like I finished graduate school. What is it? What is this about? And,
no more learning here. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I'll bring the book in to the meeting and and show it. But I don't know if.
Well, I have to admit, I had a lot of those little sticky notes sticking out of the page, so you would know that I've actually looked at the book. But for me, you're right. We don't have in those systems. There's not a time, and maybe that's different in some corporations and some settings where you do have the time to think about the big issues. I like to think that they're doing that at these Google and Amazon and all these big places. They're actually thinking about the impact, in particular like Facebook now, the whole political thing where
Zuckerberg got really burned by some things that had happened. Yeah.
Wow. There's some real concerns here because one that came up for me was this idea of free speech, which we want to have free speech, but what about paid speech? I mean, free and paid. Yeah. That's a difference between that. And they're not really seeing that difference right now in Facebook. And that's why I think all these hackers are coming in and these millions of accounts that come with a .ru on the back of it, and are on the money that's being moved can influence people in ways that is it's against their own best interest in some situations. So that's maybe for a discussion for another day. We'll have to do the whole Facebook discussion maybe because there's a lot there. But the point being that it connects to this idea of us not really thinking through, planning, setting the goals, and is this good for us and how will it affect the future? And it's just a shame that it has to take two old retired guys to come in and talk about this when wouldn't it be better if we did that in our 30s?
No, man,
we're job. Come on,
we're old guys. It's our job now to sit in a Burger King and talk about how it could be better, right?
That's actually true. If you look at the adult development literature, that's exactly where we're at. We're at this stage of life where we're kind of looking at our accomplishments and what we would have done better and changed things. And I think that's actually is part of the series of life, those stages that we go through.
Well, you talked about being optimistic, and I'm an optimist too, and I do see a lot of evidence that the people in the Silicon sector are really trying to utilize some of those resources to really address some of these issues we're talking about. At the same time, you realize, well, we're a capitalist economy, and really you got to ultimately be about making money and earning a living too. So somewhere in the middle is a balance. But
it may not have the luxury at those early stages to do that because we're trying to make a living and provide for the family.
But it takes a lot of creativity to say, okay, well, how can we be aware of where we are globally and use that awareness to create jobs and create money and to create a good economy for everybody. And that's a balance because like anyone else, I think those guys are having a tendency to look at, well, what's worked before. When somebody says we don't need to reinvent the wheel, I've heard that my whole life.
I've said it probably.
My question is, why don't we need to reinvent the wheel? Isn't there something better? Do we actually need to touch the ground? So I think there's room for creativity there, right?
I like it. Yeah. We watch too many Star Wars movies around here.
That's right.
Right. Those little gliders are always above the ground, right?
Yeah.
Well, this has been interesting. I really think that what happens in the processing of our conversation that happens for me is that I've got a couple ideas I want to kind of almost in a way pushes us toward something we haven't thought about, and something new. Do our little part, but we need this bigger collective to make some changes for that. So, well, my response was we have to start somewhere. So
that's true. Yeah.
Let's kind of get that going. All right, sir. Well, what else is going on? Final words on this idea of technology, and we're making good decisions for ourselves, and the promises of technology that didn't quite come to pass. Your suitcase flying car.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you didn't get that.
Well, I think I think ultimately it's not that the promise hadn't come to pass, it's that we're not there yet, but
Right.
that at least we're having these discussions and these thoughts, and someone is going to make some huge discovery that's going to create that Thomas Kuhn leap,
Right.
the paradigm shift,
Absolutely.
the jump in. We all know when we look at statistics, we see curves and then we see leaps, and that's
Right.
that's a common phenomenon. We don't talk about it a lot. We act as if there's a curving trajectory always up, but typically it's
It spikes up.
there are
That's it,
spikes
that's
up
it.
and down, and there are plateaus, but then there are sudden leaps. I think that's going to happen, and we have a tendency also to look back at the past and we're able to, in retrospect,
Yes,
see
always.
those leaps, and we were part of those, but we're not seeing what's happening now. So it's that's just human nature.
No,
right?
but I mean that's
Yeah.
a big point, because just look at how much information we have at our disposal on our phones, bombarded with information and content that we're not able to process so much. And we've had this discussion as well. Need to get Jeff Conklin in here for this one, but the idea is that it's creep in a way. This information availability now that we have from all of these different sources are we're just accepting. But if you look back 10, 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have any of this available
Right.
to us. Now, if something happens around the globe, we know about it.
Right.
And the ability to evaluate it, to talk about it, to share it, to make some sense out of it. We've never had that before as we have now. And that's going to continue